studying perspective sucks. I mean, look at this. Like when I used to see something like this, I would get either completely discouraged or very upset. I don't know, maybe it's the confusing amount of lines that I see here, but honestly, it was impossible for me to study anything like this. So, because perspective is needed in anything we draw, even figures, by the way, I had to learn to use a method that let me practice perspective without actually losing my mind. So in this video, we're going to talk about the problem with the traditional method of studying perspective. We're going to see how to solve it and propose an alternative. And by the end of it, you will know how to exactly get started with this new method and the next step you need to take so that you are finally free from the line clutter. But as I said, first, let's start with the problem. This is insane. So it's too complicated to be utilized for me. So what do? Well, the solution for me was this. This is a 45-degree square. Why a square? Well, a square is the only way we can use to measure in 3D space. And measuring in 3D space is really important because we need proportions to convey an idea, whether that's a car or a human body or whatever this thing is. But why does it have to be exactly 45 degrees? Well, because it's always a square. And if you tried perspective before, you might have noticed that if you start the traditional way with one-point perspective, you can't even tell if something is exactly a square or not. It can be anything. So the 45 degrees guarantee us that this is going to be one square, that is one unit. And this is the first advantage against the usual method. You know exactly how big or small something is. The second advantage is that we're not going to have to add the clutter of lines that the traditional method requires with all, the vanishing points and stuff, because we're only going to use the ones we need. But how do we actually go about this? Well, first, we're going to start with a cross. And notice that this cross is exactly the same on the left and right, but the top is ever so slightly shorter than the bottom. Now, depending on how short you make the top compared to the bottom, the perspective will change. So if you make it very much shorter, the lens of the perspective is going to be very much skewed. Now, when we connect these, we're basically creating those vanishing lines that converge on the horizon that we see in the traditional perspective study method. But I just said horizon, right? Or eye level. Is that a thing though? Because technically, if I take this square and I rotate the whole thing, the square is still correct. But how do we call the new set of vanishing points and horizon line? We can't really call them horizon line or eye level because it's neither of those. Like our eyes are still at the same level and the horizon is not tilted. We still have the plane at the bottom, right? So I would define this as a perspective plane or local coordinates of this new system. And this is going to be completely dependent on each single object. So each object in 3D space has its own set of coordinates. And that's something that took me so long to realize and got me stuck for very, very, very long. But let's put this guy into practice. Now, we need to make this useful, so we want to use it to measure. How do we measure? Well, we're going to use the unit and subdivide it or extend it. Now, how do we subdivide this? Well, first, we would have to make a cross in a normal square, but we already have the cross, so we're halfway there. When we have the cross, no pun intended, we can draw a line that goes through the middle of the cross and follows the same vanishing lines as the other two quote-unquote parallel lines of the square. We do it on one side and we do it on the other side. We can also subdivide it further to create this 16 little square grid, then we'll see soon is extremely useful for something else. But when you do this, you'll probably notice it's not so simple to gauge the correct angle at which you have to draw the middle line. It's because your eye needs to be in place, so you need to be able to tell the relative differences in angle and when things are converging equally. So if your eye is not in place, actually, I can help you get there because I have a mentorship program that's designed specifically to target your worst weaknesses, make you work on them in a very efficient way, and take you to your next art goal or where you want to be with your art very, very quickly. So if you're interested, check out the link in video description. so that we can work together soon. But okay, it's useful to divide this. How do we extend this thing? Like, how do we use this in a grid system? Well, we can use the same method that we utilize now to divide the square to duplicate it. So we take the same distance from the main two lines and we reproduce it, making sure the third line, whether that's at the top, the bottom, follows, again, the same rough convergence. So we can do it as many times as we want, and if we do it on the top, you can actually figure out where the horizon line is as well, without doing that whole insane system that you did in the traditional method. Now, we divided the square. How do we duplicate it? Well, it's very simple. We're going to use one of these points that we already have. We're simply going to extend the lines from the same square, then using the middle point that we found before tracing the splitting line, we're going to drag another line across from one of the corners and find a point that will define the edge of our new square. So basically, we created a 2x1 rectangle now. We can measure in 3D. That's awesome. But wait a second, I don't always want to draw things that are rotated at 45 degrees, right? That's not everything there is to this method, because we're going to now use the grid that we drew before when we split the square into 16 smaller parts. It turns out that if we connect the dots between the middle points, we actually have a perfect 1-point perspective square, because the vanishing lines are going to converge exactly at the top. Now, this is going to be smaller, so if you want to make it exactly the same size, this is roughly 2/3 of the original, so you can extend that if you like. But we effectively created another set of perspective lines. And it's not over, because we can also do it with 22.5 and 67.5 degree angles. This way, we are covering a lot of the rotations you're probably going to encounter when drawing anything, and we haven't really drawn as many lines as we would have with the traditional system. We also have more flexibility because we don't have that insane grid of the traditional system where it's basically impossible to rotate things. This is something I've never been able to figure out. But wait, there is one last thing, because this is flat. How about the vertical axis? Well, we already covered the box rotations in the other video, but in general, you want the third vanishing point towards either the bottom or the top if you're in a 3-point perspective, and it's going to be in the middle of the 45-degree square. So as long as the lines are converging ever so slightly towards the bottom and it's not super close to it, it should be fine. And this is going to be the unit, so the box, so the square is the first unit, the box is going to be the three-dimensional unit, say like a voxel, like Minecraft, I guess, to draw anything from cars to people to airplanes and everything else. But again, if you want to know more about this, check out the box rotation in perspective video right here. Okay, that's all for today's video. I hope you found it useful. This system actually revolutionized perspective for me, so I hope it's going to do the same thing for you as well. Actually, let me know in the comments down below if you find it useful, if you have any problem with it, because I think this is extremely beneficial, okay? Oh, don't forget to like and subscribe, of course. I'll pay that fee. All right, as always, thanks for watching and take care.